Have you ever sat across from someone you care about and felt like they weren't actually there? Not gone, not absent, just somewhere else. Maybe they were looking at their phone. Maybe they were thinking about work. Maybe they were already halfway inside tomorrow. The strange thing is, you've probably done the same thing. You replied, you reacted, you sent the message, you kept the conversation alive, and somehow the connection still felt missing. That's what makes this difficult to notice. Because from the outside, everything looks connected. The messages arrive, the notifications appear, the conversations never completely stop. Everyone is available. Everyone is reachable. Everyone is still there. So why does everyone feel so far away? Maybe the problem isn't that people disappeared. Maybe the problem is that presence became optional. We've never had more ways to reach each other, and somehow we've never been less certain that anyone actually arrived. I noticed something strange a while ago. There are people I interact with almost every day. I see their updates, I see their photos, I see their reactions. Sometimes I even know what they had for lunch, and yet I have no idea how they're doing. That's a strange kind of connection, the kind that feels active, the kind that feels alive, the kind that somehow leaves you feeling alone anyway. There was a time when distance looked like distance. You knew when someone wasn't there. A friend moved away, a relative lived in another city, a letter took days to arrive. A phone call felt important because it didn't happen constantly. You couldn't reach people whenever you wanted, and strangely enough, that made the moments you did reach them feel real. Presence wasn't assumed. It was noticeable. You knew when someone showed up. You knew when they stayed. You knew when they were paying attention. Distance was frustrating, but at least it was honest. Today, distance is harder to recognize because it rarely looks like absence anymore. It looks like activity. A message appears. A reaction arrives. A photo gets liked. A story gets viewed. The signal keeps moving. The connection appears alive, but something feels different. You can spend an entire day interacting with people and still feel like you never actually met anyone. Not because nobody responded, because response and presence are not the same thing. The modern version of distance doesn't announce itself. It hides inside constant contact, and that's what makes it difficult to notice. The relationship looks active. The conversation looks active. The connection looks active. Meanwhile, something important quietly leaves the room. Attention. I sometimes think about how excited people used to be when the phone rang. Not because the technology was special. Because somebody chose that moment. Somebody stopped what they were doing. Somebody arrived. Today, almost everyone is reachable, and somehow every interaction feels easier to postpone. Easier to divide. Easier to multitask. The connection survived. The attention didn't. The strange thing about modern communication is that it solved the wrong problem. The problem used to be access. Now, access is everywhere. You can reach almost anyone in seconds. A friend, a parent, a coworker, someone you haven't seen in years. The barrier disappeared. The connection became effortless. And that's exactly where something started to change. When something becomes effortless, it also becomes easier to ignore. A message arrives. You read it later. A friend calls. You call back tomorrow. A conversation starts. Another notification interrupts it. Nothing dramatic happens, nothing breaks, nobody leaves. The connection simply gets divided into smaller and smaller pieces, until eventually nobody is talking to each other. Everyone is managing interruptions. That's why so many conversations feel unfinished, not because they ended, because they never fully began. Part of your attention stayed here. Part of it moved somewhere else. A notification, a task, a thought, a screen, a different conversation happening at the same time. The body remained present. The attention kept leaving. And attention is what people actually feel, not proximity, not availability, attention. That's why someone can answer every message and still feel distant. That's why someone can sit next to you and feel unavailable. That's why connection becomes difficult to measure. Everything appears active, but very little feels shared. I started noticing how often conversations now happen between interruptions. Someone answers while walking, while working, while watching something else, while replying to someone else. The conversation still exists, but it feels thinner, like everyone is speaking through several doors at once. Nobody disappeared. Nobody left. Everyone simply brought something else into the room. A strange thing happens when a signal becomes frequent enough. Eventually, it starts feeling like a relationship. You see someone's name. You see their photo. You see their updates. You see what they ate, where they traveled, what they bought, what they watched, what they want everyone else to know. And after a while, your brain starts telling you a story. I know what's happening in their life. But do you? Knowing about someone is not the same thing as knowing someone. That's the illusion. The modern world gives you endless information about people, and just enough information to make you feel connected. A birthday reminder appears. You send an emoji. A post appears. You leave a reaction. A story appears. You watch it. The interaction happened. The relationship received another signal, and somehow nothing meaningful was exchanged. The strange part is that these interactions aren't fake. They're real. They happened. The problem is that they begin to replace things they were never designed to replace. Conversation, curiosity, presence, attention. A reaction is not a conversation. A view is not a visit. An update is not understanding. But after enough repetition, the difference becomes harder to notice. The signal becomes good enough to imitate connection, and imitation can be surprisingly convincing, especially when everyone is doing the same thing. Sometimes I catch myself feeling updated on someone's life without actually talking to them. I know where they went. I know what they posted. I know what they're presenting to the world. But if they suddenly sat across from me, I'm not sure I'd know what to ask. That's a strange realization. To feel informed without feeling connected. Most relationships don't disappear all at once. They fade into convenience. Not because anybody decides to stop caring, because the substitute becomes good enough. You don't need to call. You saw their update. You don't need to ask how they're doing. They posted something yesterday. You don't need to reach out. You'll probably see them online later. Nothing ends, nothing breaks, nothing dramatic happens. That's what makes it difficult to notice. The relationship slowly moves from experience to observation. You stop participating. You start monitoring. And monitoring feels surprisingly similar to connection, at least at first. You know they're still there. You know they're active. You know they're alive. You know they're posting. You know they're responding. You know they're visible. And visibility creates a dangerous illusion. The illusion that closeness still exists. But visibility is not closeness. A person can share everything and still remain unknown. A person can be constantly visible and still feel completely alone. The modern world became very good at showing us people, not necessarily helping us experience them. That's an important difference, because relationships are built through participation, not observation. Presence, not updates. Attention, not awareness. I sometimes notice how easy it is to mistake familiarity for connection. You see someone's face every day. You see their posts. You see their opinions. You see fragments of their life. Eventually, they start feeling familiar. But familiarity isn't intimacy. A television character can feel familiar. A stranger can feel familiar. The question isn't whether someone feels familiar. The question is whether anyone is still truly present when it matters. The strange thing is that this doesn't only happen online. It happens in real life, too. You can see it almost everywhere. A group of friends at dinner, everyone present, everyone talking, everyone occasionally disappearing into a screen. A family sitting in the same room, each person connected to a different world. A couple sharing a table, physically close, mentally scattered across 10 different places. Nobody left. Nobody walked away. And yet something feels incomplete. That's because presence is not measured in distance. It's measured in attention. You can be thousands of miles away and feel close to someone. You can sit across from them and feel invisible. The body is easy to locate. Attention is harder. Attention keeps moving. That's what makes modern disconnection so confusing. The people are still there. The friendships are still there. The relationships are still there. From the outside, everything appears intact, but attention has become fragmented, divided, distributed. And relationships experience that division long before we consciously notice it. That's why some conversations feel strangely hollow, not because nobody spoke, because nobody fully arrived. Everyone brought part of themselves into the room. The rest stayed somewhere else. Work, notifications, plans, deadlines, tomorrow, the next thing. The conversation survived. Presence didn't. I think that's why some of the most memorable conversations happen when nothing else is competing for attention. No notifications, no multitasking, no second screen, no background urgency. Just two people occupying the same moment. The strange thing is that this used to feel normal. Now it feels rare. And anything that becomes rare eventually starts feeling valuable. Maybe that's why certain moments feel so memorable. Not because they're extraordinary, because they're becoming unusual. A family sitting at the same table, not scrolling, not replying, not multitasking, just eating, talking, listening, occupying the same moment. The strange thing is that nothing impressive is happening. No major event, no breakthrough conversation, no life-changing realization, just presence. And somehow, that feels increasingly rare. There is something I genuinely admire about families who still protect that ritual. Dinner together, phones put away, no television competing for attention, no second screen glowing in the background, just people sharing the same hour of the same day. Not because it's old-fashioned, because it requires something that has become surprisingly difficult. Undivided attention. The modern world constantly asks for pieces of it. A notification, an email, a headline, a recommendation. Something always wants to enter the room. Something always wants a fragment of the moment. And yet some people still choose to close the door. At least for an hour. At least for a meal. At least long enough for everyone to fully arrive. That's what makes those moments feel different. Not because they're perfect, because nobody is somewhere else. For a brief period of time, everyone is finally here. I've always found it interesting that some of the strongest memories people carry from childhood are surprisingly ordinary. A family dinner, a conversation at the table, a weekend meal. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just repeated moments of shared attention. Maybe that's because attention is what people actually remember. Not the food, not the room, not the schedule. The feeling that, for a little while, everyone chose the same moment. Perhaps the most confusing version of disconnection happens inside relationships. Not because love disappears, not because people stop caring, because caring and attention are not the same thing. Two people can love each other deeply and still slowly drift apart. Not through conflict, not through betrayal, not through some dramatic event, through accumulation. Small moments, tiny absences, repeated thousands of times. A conversation interrupted, a thought left unfinished, a glance toward a screen, a reply delayed by something else. Nothing important enough to remember, nothing serious enough to discuss. nothing large enough to feel dangerous. And yet the distance keeps growing, not suddenly, gradually, quietly, one divided moment at a time. That's what makes modern disconnection so difficult to recognize. The relationship still exists, the routines still exist, the messages still exist, the photographs still exist. Everything appears intact. Meanwhile, something essential begins to weaken. The feeling of being fully seen, the feeling of being fully heard, the feeling that another person has actually arrived. Sometimes two people can spend an entire evening together, share the same room, share the same table, share the same house, and still spend most of the night somewhere else. One person thinking about tomorrow, one person scrolling through yesterday. Both physically present, neither fully here. That's the strange part. Love requires many things, but attention might be the one people underestimate the most. Because attention is how another person experiences your presence. Without it, even closeness begins to feel distant. I don't think most relationships end because people stop caring. I think many begin struggling when people stop noticing where their attention goes. The shift is usually small, almost invisible. Nobody wakes up and decides to become distant. Life simply becomes crowded. Work, stress, responsibilities, screens, deadlines, the next thing. And before long, two people are sharing the same life while experiencing different moments. That's a difficult thing to measure, but it's surprisingly easy to feel. Here's the irony. The modern world solved the problem people worried about for centuries: distance. Today, you can reach almost anyone, immediately. A message, a call, a photo, a voice note, a reaction, a video, a notification. The connection is always available. The signal never stops. And yet, something feels missing. Modern loneliness isn't caused by isolation. It's caused by access. You can reach everyone, and somehow nobody feels reachable. That's the contradiction. People became available. They didn't become present. The difference sounds small until you experience it. A person answers your message, but you can feel they're somewhere else. A conversation happens, but it never fully lands. A room is full, yet nobody seems to arrive. The signal is there, the presence isn't. That's why modern disconnection feels so confusing, because nothing is visibly broken. Nobody disappeared, nobody left, nobody stopped responding. Everything still works. The messages arrive, the calls connect, the profiles remain active. From the outside, connection appears stronger than ever, but connection and contact are not the same thing. Contact transfers information. Connection transfers presence, and one of those became much easier than the other. The world optimized communication, not necessarily attention, not necessarily listening, not necessarily being here. I sometimes wonder if this is why so many people struggle to explain what feels wrong. The evidence suggests the opposite. The contacts are there, the conversations are there, the notifications are there, the network is there, everything looks connected. That's what makes the feeling difficult to trust. You start questioning yourself. Maybe you're imagining it. Maybe you're expecting too much. Maybe this is just how life works now. But then every once in a while, you have a conversation where somebody is completely present. No rush, no distraction, no divided attention. And suddenly the difference becomes impossible to ignore. You remember what connection actually feels like. When people talk about feeling disconnected, they rarely mean a lack of contact. Most people have contact. Messages, notifications, updates, feeds, conversations. The signal is everywhere. What they miss is harder to describe, because what they miss isn't information, it's presence. The feeling that another person is sharing the same moment. The feeling that someone is listening without waiting for their turn to speak. The feeling that attention isn't divided between 6 different places. That's what makes certain conversations stay with you for years. Not because the words were extraordinary, because for a brief period of time, nothing else was competing for the moment. You felt seen, you felt heard, you felt understood. Not perfectly, not completely, just enough. And sometimes enough changes everything. The strange thing is that people often spend years searching for deeper connection while overlooking the thing that creates it. Attention. Not constant attention, not obsessive attention, just intentional attention. The kind that says, for the next few minutes, nothing else is more important than this moment. That sounds simple until you try to do it. That's when you realize how much of modern life is built around interruption. How many things compete for awareness? How many things pull you away from where you are? And how rare it has become to give another person your full attention without feeling the urge to leave. Not physically, mentally. I think that's why certain people leave such a strong impression on us. Not because they're the smartest, not because they're the funniest, not because they're the most successful. Because when you're with them, you feel like they've actually arrived. They're listening, they're curious, they're present. And presence has become so uncommon that it almost feels like a superpower. Which is strange, because it used to be normal. Maybe that's why this feeling is so difficult to explain, because it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like distance. A strange distance that appears even when people are still around. Friends still exist, families still exist, relationships still exist. The contacts remain in your phone, the conversations still happen, the messages still arrive. Nothing obviously disappeared, and yet something feels further away than it used to. For a long time, many people assume the answer is simple. They think they need more people, more conversations, more activity, more interaction. But what if the problem isn't quantity? What if the problem is presence? What if the thing people miss isn't connection itself, but the experience of fully sharing a moment? Because moments are where relationships actually live. Not inside contact lists, not inside notifications, not inside archives of messages. Inside moments. Shared moments. The kind that cannot be multitasked. The kind that cannot be divided. The kind that demand attention. Maybe that's why disconnection feels so strange today. People didn't disappear. The moments did. Or at least many of them became fragmented, interrupted, distributed across too many places at once. And when moments become fragmented, relationships eventually feel fragmented too. Not because anyone stopped caring, because caring quietly became surrounded by distractions. The uncomfortable part is that this isn't only something we experience from other people. We do it too. We've all sat in conversations while thinking about something else. We've all checked a screen during a moment that deserved our attention. We've all physically stayed while mentally leaving. That's why this isn't really a story about what happened to everyone else. It's a story about what happened to all of us, including me, including you. Which makes the question harder, but also more honest. Maybe the strangest part of all this is that people didn't become less connected. They became more connected than ever. The signals multiplied, the networks expanded, the barriers disappeared. The world became smaller, and somehow the distance remained. Not physical distance, something harder to measure. The distance between sharing information and sharing a moment. The distance between contact and connection. The distance between being available and being present. Maybe that's what people are really feeling when they say something is missing. Not the absence of people, the absence of arrival. Because every meaningful relationship depends on the same fragile thing: attention. Not perfect attention, not constant attention, just enough attention for another person to feel that you're actually here, that you're not already somewhere else, that this moment matters, that they matter. And maybe that's why the most valuable thing you can give someone today isn't your time. It's your presence, your undivided attention, your willingness to stay in the same moment for a little while longer. In a world that constantly encourages you to leave it, the strange thing isn't that everyone became distant. The strange thing is that everyone stayed, and somehow disappeared anyway. If this felt familiar, you're not alone in noticing it. Punchline Protocol explores the human experience. Darkside Protocol explores the system behind it. Debrief Protocol explores what those two things become when viewed together. 3 perspectives, 1 reality. The ideas are human, the narration is digital. The interpretation is yours.